strategic ideas changed throughout that period of time. And I think it also reflects what the movement changed in that period of time, the animal movement. All right. So my story starts a long time ago. I'm 53. And here I'm 8 or something, and I was always an animal lover. We always had animals in the house, and I said at one point I should stop eating animals because I really like them so much. And the problem was that I really loved eating meat, and it took me a very long time to stop. I only stopped at university when I read this book, Animal Liberation by Peter Singer, and I got really motivated and obsessed by this topic. I made my thesis, my master's thesis on this topic. Then I went to the US to do internships in animal rights organizations, and when I came back, I started an organization. And I'll tell some more along the story. But basically why animals captivated me so much is, on the one hand, an emotional reason. I was always very connected to animals. I like it. I find it very much easier to like or to love animals than people. It's always been like that. For some reason, but also a very rational reason, like the numbers are so incredible. And I just go very briefly over the 3 effective altruism criteria that you know already of scale, neglect, and tractability. But like in terms of scale, this is just so mind-boggling. You know, all the animals that that people generally see, which is basically just actually cows, you know, in terms of farmed animals, cows is all they see. Maybe now and then a pig, you know, but like those animals that they see, that's just this yellow slice. That's the animals that they see, and then all the rest is chickens and fish. And we are at like 2 trillion animals. So the size, the scale of this thing is so incredibly mind-boggling that, like, yeah, I wanted to devote my life to it. And then secondly, not just the scale, but also the intensity. Many people say, like, oh, animals can't suffer like people or whatever. But here's Richard Dawkins saying that animals might be capable of feeling more suffering and pain than humans. And his hypothesis is that if you're an organism on this planet, pain teaches you something. It teaches you not to do something. If you put your hand in the fire, pain tells you don't do that. And Dawkins here says maybe the smarter, the more complex a creature is, the less of those lessons it needs to learn the lesson. You understand? The less of those painful impulses it needs to learn that lesson. But if you're not so smart, not so complicated cognitively, you need more of those lessons and more painful ones. And that might be an argument why they actually even suffer more pain. And there's more arguments. There's like they maybe have a different sense of time. Maybe time goes slower for some animals, you know, and the pain lasts longer, etc., etc. So that is about the scale and the intensity. And the second one is about the second one that convinced me so much is the neglect. You know, like I always use this figure. The worldwide movement for animals, for farmed animals, has about $300 million in total worldwide. And then just compare it to the marketing budget of this restaurant group. This is one company, one business that has several brands under it, Burger King and Popeyes and other things. And that one company, just in marketing budget, has 1.3 billion. So that's 4 times as much just for marketing from just one restaurant group, right? Or if you compare the people working there, we have 3,000 full-time staff in our movement. They have 53,000 staff, all included, right? Not just marketing, but everybody, just to show the size of that thing. And I think nothing expresses my feeling better about how we are ignoring animals than this quote by the South African writer Coetzee, and I've translated it to French so you can better understand. Nous sommes hantés par l'horreur de ce que nous faisons aux animaux, mais nous sommes tout aussi hantés de savoir à quel point les autres ne le sont pas. It's very strong for me, like, you know, like we see all this suffering just being ignored and we just can't understand why is everybody ignoring that. And the total of all this, of the scale and this intensity, I think is very well summarized by Harari here. Les animaux sont les principales victimes de l'histoire. Le traitement réservé aux animaux domestiques dans les élevages industriels est peut-être le pire crime de l'histoire. I really think it's true. You know, you can leave out the peut-être. Yeah. So, like I said, I'm 53 years old. I'm starting here. This is, born here, and this is where I started my activism in '98 when I was about 22 years old. And then, since then, I have been like doing different things, focusing on different things, and that's what I want to talk about here. And so, there's basically three big topics or categories that I focused on, and that also the movement has shifted, I think, in the same way. The first is focusing on individual change with moral arguments. The second phase for me was focusing on institutional change, more on the economy and products, etc. And then thirdly, the last phase that I'm in, focusing more on movement building. Does that make sense, these three topics? So I'll go over these. So individual change, that's all the thing that we do and that our movement started with, I think, like trying to convince people to go vegan and to also like realize that animals are important, etc. And much of the time, this is also like, if activists do this, often they're younger or newer, and also more radical. This is also my radical period here. I was arrested in the United States when I was dressed up as a pig. Not anymore here, but they put me in jail for a little bit. That was the only time I actually went to jail. But this is my more radical period, and here was in the US, doing internships with PETA, among other things, other organizations. And here's a group picture of me and other volunteers of PETA. Can you see my T-shirt there? Do you know what's on it? Meat is murder. Yeah, meat is murder. So that is my radical period, my less pragmatic period. I sort of believe that, but I don't say it anymore. This was on camera, right? So I was very impressed when I went to the US back then in '98 by an organization called Vegan Outreach. Have you heard of them? So Vegan Outreach started like they sole objective and their sole intervention was, let's print as many booklets as possible, why vegan booklets, little brochures, and we hand them out to as many people, college students especially, as possible, right? And so they were printing millions. And I was thinking like, oh my God, this is like really interesting because, yeah, this could work. You know, like they're not going to convince everybody, but if they even convince a small part of the population, then we can create this vegan world. And this was the thing that they did. And this was sort of the theory behind it, or something like that. Have you ever heard of this? If every vegan converted one meat eater every year. So all of you, just have to convince one other person to go vegan per year. It's feasible, right? You know, if we can do that, if all the vegans do that, how soon do we think, like, if all the vegans in America do that, starting from 1%, 2% of vegans, how long does it take to veganize the whole of the United States? So let's say USA, 7 million vegans starting from 2%. It's just going to take 5.5 years before we have this vegan US, right? Guess what? I mean, this was a theory in 2000. It didn't happen, right? It didn't happen. What happened is something like this, right? Stagnation. So for some reason, that thing doesn't really happen. I think still that this individual outreach is important. Why is it important? Well, I think that by talking to people about morality and ethics, we can reach the low-hanging fruit, the people who are susceptible to finding that relevant and interesting. And those people often become the activists and the entrepreneurs in the vegan space. So that's just 1% or 1% of 1% of the population, but they are very important. That's all you. You were probably convinced by ethical arguments, right? And you were here because you're activists. Secondly, we have to work on what Tom said in the previous talk. We have to work on increasing demand, and I think that just focusing on production and on supply is not enough, because we see many companies going out of business. Sometimes often because there is not sufficient demand. So this grassroots activism and this moral activism, this one-on-one outreach, etc., can help, I think, to some extent also increase demand. And thirdly, grassroots movements can, like I was doing back then, they can be important because they can be more radical than established organizations, often. Yeah? So that was my first phase. I'll come back to this outreach in a minute. But the second phase was when I came back from the United States and I started an organization called EVA, Ethical Vegetarian Alternative. So it's a vegan organization, but we call it vegetarian. And this was organization, when I left it in 2014, had, I don't know, 12 staff or something. We were the first organization in the world to get structural subsidies from the government, and we still get them. So over the years, we have gotten for our work several millions of euros to do this vegan outreach, basically. So that was quite exceptional. After this, I was involved in an international organization. The reasoning back then was we were seeing other organizations in Europe with our organization. We had contact with AVF and other organizations in Europe. And at some point I said, like, why don't we have one organization? You know, like instead of all these different ones, we need an international one. Because if you look at all these fields, I mean, you can think of international organizations, right, in the human rights field, or in the environmental field, and also in the animal rights field. But there in the veganism plant-based space, there was not really anything. And that's why we started ProVeg. And ProVeg is now an organization that's active in 17 countries. We have about 250 staff. So that's what I'm involved in. And I would like to explain some of the principles that we use, and that also are my own principles in terms of like what we think is effective. And it's all about, in one word, pragmatism. So I always distinguish idealism from pragmatism, right? Idealism is talking to people about what you want them to do, and they have to do it right now for the reasons that you have. You know, if I say like, yeah, I'm in there for the animals, the other people have to do it for the animals too, and they have to do it right now. That's sort of the idea of pragmatism. So this whole message, go vegan for the animals, go vegan because you love animals, because animals are important, that's the very idealistic message that I believe in, but that is not necessarily always effective. And if you look at this message, there's two dimensions in there. You have to, on the one hand, and this doesn't work very well, on the one hand, change your behavior, a behavioral dimension, from being a meat eater to becoming a vegan. And there's also a dimension of attitude, from like not caring to caring about animals, right? And vegans, the typical animal rights person, they're not very enthusiastic about all these in-between steps. Even if you go vegan for the wrong reasons, it's like, ah, you know? The only thing you want as an idealistic vegan is this, vegan for the animals, right? So that is what I mean with idealism. And I can totally understand it, and I feel like that myself. But if we act like that, if that's what our activism is based on, I think we are bound to fail. So instead of that, I suggest that we are pragmatic, and pragmatism is about solving problems in a sensible way that aligns with what the time is capable of, and also is not beholden, is not like stuck to all kinds of rules about how something should be, or what is ethical and what is not ethical, right? And maybe this is very controversial, but I'm gonna tell you a thought experiment. We discussed it a little bit yesterday. But this is just to show, and there's no like right or wrong answer. I mean, maybe there is, but this is just to show like the distinction between rules and results. So the thing is, I wrote this blog post a long time ago. Would you eat meat for a lot of money? So the idea is like if somebody gives you 100,000 euros, would you eat a steak for that? And the thing is, of course, you can give that money to an animal rights organization so that they can help a lot of people, right? So this is how I distinguish, or that's one way to distinguish pragmatism from idealism, or maybe results orientation versus like values orientation, right? And there might be people sitting here saying like, oh, I would never eat a steak. It's totally fine, okay? Just showing this the difference. Another way to look at it is looking from the viewpoint of your customer. Our customers, or the people or the beings we defend, are the animals in the cages, and we always have to look at like, what would they want us to do? How are they seeing us? If they see that we are discussing about like some very small principle or something, I think they're going like, oh my God, are these the people who have to defend me? You know, like, because they're wasting time. Yeah, that's what I think the pig would think. It's also, and this is also delicate, we are trying with ProVeg to be what we call focused but aware. That means we want to be focused on what we do and aware of other topics, but we're not going to get involved in them. Like, you can easily get involved in all these side topics. So this is what we are about, and we are talking about animals and justice and environment and health. I mean, we use these arguments for plant-based eating. We use them, but like, if it's tangentially, it's like not entirely related, then we're not going to get into it. And some people do want us to take a stance on Palestine or Black Lives Matter or all these things. And I can understand that they want that. I don't think it's the best idea. And I always also say that what we have created in this movement, and I'm very much on the left politically, but what we have created is a movement that mainly appeals to the left. You know, we are very diverse and very inclusive. Inclusive is this big word of including everybody, but I think we are mainly inclusive on this side. We're not inclusive that side. And I'm not saying like we should go there, you know, like with the Hitlers and everybody, but like maybe here is okay, you know, so that is sometimes a contentious thing, and but I think it's like really interesting to talk about, because we might be missing a lot of opportunities if we cater only to this audience. And I think it's also clear that, I mean, in the last few years, it's gotten clear that we're probably not going to make it if we keep doing that, right? Not with the political winds the way they are blowing. Another principle is what I call Yanya, and that means you are not your audience. You think always from the perspective of the audience that you want to reach. And you think in terms of like what is possible for them, right? So doing what is possible is like, I think, the core of pragmatism. And people say like, oh yeah, but we can't talk about this or that, because if we were talking about human beings, you wouldn't say that. Have you heard that argument? Like, you know, you can't talk about reduction of meat because you would never talk about reduction of prostitution or slavery or child abuse or whatever. I think that's wrong. I think people, for instance, in the anti-slavery fight have been talking about reduction and about improvements and about incremental steps. For instance, this is very similar to factory farming. See, this is a slave ship, a very famous diagram of a slave ship that was spread everywhere, and they were showing the circumstances of the slaves on the ships. And for a long time, abolitionists were trying to improve the circumstances. And for a long time, abolitionists were not like fighting against or fighting in favor of the abolition of slavery, of the institution of slavery. They were fighting for the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade, which was a pragmatic thing to do because they thought the other thing was too difficult. So I think in every movement we have seen pragmatic approaches and interventions, also where we think they were not appropriate. Yeah. So, in terms of our cause, and I'm talking about food especially, and veganism, not so much animal welfare, etc. I'll come back to that. But in terms of food, incrementalism means mainly to ask for reduction, right? And to ask for reduction also for various reasons. It could be for the environment, it could be for health, whatever. And we trust, and I'll come back to that, that this is also part of the solution. I was on a podcast, I don't know, a year ago or something, but you know this guy, Paul Bashir from Anonymous for the Voiceless? Who knows Anonymous? The people who stand in the streets with the screens and with the masks? Yeah. So we had a very long discussion about strategy, and we disagree about a lot of things. At the end, I mean, we're trying to model a good civil conversation between two people who don't agree, and I think we succeeded at that, at least. And at the end, we agreed Paul would read my book, and I would participate for the first time in a cube, in one of these actions. And it's what I did last week, actually, so a bit later than planned, but I participated in this big action in Amsterdam, and I was talking to these people about going vegan. And I don't know who has ever participated in a cube. Oh yeah, quite a few people. So yeah, that's very, very successful. So I was following the protocol and doing everything that they expected of me. I was really trying it out and doing my best. I think it mostly confirms my suspicions about what works and what doesn't. There was, the next day, there was an analysis that we were like watching a video of like a good interaction. Like people saw this as like a success. And so in the end, the guy that the activist was talking to said like, I mean, you know how they do it, they say like vegan from now, after this long discussion or short discussion, they say vegan from now, and if the guy shakes your hand, or you shake their hand because they say, yes, I will go vegan now, that's a success. And they were showing that, and I was thinking, I was a bit the party pooper, and I said, like, I think I think it's a nice conversation, but I think the chances that this person is now vegan is not higher than 20%, right? And they were like, oh, why? And I think that is just because our morality and the motivation, etc., and the importance of moral arguments, we overestimate it. We overestimate it, especially in this world that is where it's so difficult still for most people to go vegan. I mean, this person will come home, he says like, yeah, I'll go vegan, yeah, I'm convinced, and then they'll come home to their kids, and the kid says, can we get a burger, or the wife, or whatever, you know, like, and he comes back into this meat-oriented world, and it's very difficult then to continue that and to act on that decision that you made in a discussion. So what is happening here, or what we do here, is this approach. So we try to change a person's belief, and then we assume that, or we hope that this will lead to behavior change. We need this, right? We need both. We definitely need this, because if you just believe that animals have rights or whatever, but you don't do anything about it, the animals are not helped, right? And this is what most activists think is the way to go, and this is also, I think, what is very difficult. And as long as this is very hard, it's very hard to like be open-minded here and be strong enough in your convictions here. Let me give you an example of how like we don't necessarily want to know things, because we know that if we say, okay, this is true, the consequences will be very big, right? So this is an example. The Secret Life of Plants. I don't want to know what's in that book. Fuck it, you know, like, I don't want to know that plants have feelings, because I'm eating them, and I can't see any other way, right? So I don't want to know. I'm not interested. I'm not picking up that book. I haven't read it. I am interested, but I'm scared to read it, right? So you can see that, like, my openness to learning this and to becoming aware of this is being held back by the fact that I know that I will have to make a big sacrifice if I do this. So I don't want to know. I'll stay quiet. I don't watch Earthlings, is what the media just say. Like, I'm not going to watch Earthlings because I'll have to go vegan after that, right? So this is very problematic for our approach of trying to influence people's belief and then hoping that behavior change will follow. But we can also do the other side, the opposite side. I'm not saying either one is the only one. We have to combine these approaches, right? So the other side is to work on behavior first, to make sure that people do the different behavior for whatever reason, right? And the most extreme reason that I know is this little guy here. Have you heard of him? Yep. So he's a tick. Tick. What's it in French? Tick. Oh, okay. Tick. And he causes allergy to red meat, right? And what we've seen in the US, there's like sort of like a bit of an epidemic in certain parts of the US. This tick is spreading and spreading, and it's spreading because of climate change, actually, so it's very ironic. This tick causes allergy to meat, and what happens to some of the people who get the allergy, they start to develop a moral insight. They say like, hey, it's true. I mean, yeah, this is like good for the planet, you know? So there's a radio interview with somebody who's like really a very, very big meat lover, and she's, even after she was diagnosed with that allergy, she still tried to have one bite at the barbecue, and she was carried off to the hospital in an ambulance. Right? That's how committed she was to eating meat. And then in the interview, they asked her, like, so what do you think of that today? And she said, like, well, actually, I think it's a good thing to stop eating meat, and I think this stick made me a better person. Right? So what happened here, you can see, is that the behavior came first. And once you change your behavior for whatever reason, it becomes so much easier to start thinking about the advantages of something and to start being open-minded. Right? I'll give you another example. This illustrates it very nicely. This is a commercial from a meat substitute company, a Dutch one. And I'm not going to show the video, but some stills from it. So there's like a guy in this truck, and he's like a manly man, you know? Like a, yeah, you know, the type. And he hears a news item on the radio about the impact of meat on the environment. And can you guess what he's doing? That's where his radio is. He switches the channel. He doesn't want to hear that something that he's doing is not good. Why would he want to hear that, right? On the way home in his personal car, same thing happens. Switches the channel, doesn't want to know. But then he comes home, and his wife, it's a bit of a traditional situation, his wife has made this meat substitute for him that's being advertised in the commercial. And he takes a bite and he says, this is pretty good. And then apparently he's emancipated enough to do the dishes. His wife has put the packaging and some plant-based cookbook there, and he picks it up, and he's interested. And you can imagine that the next time he hears this thing on the radio, he won't change the channel anymore. Why? Because he's had a good experience. He's had an experience that tells him, maybe there's not so much of a sacrifice to be made. Maybe it's not that hard, so maybe I can start listening to these messages that say I shouldn't do this. He's now much more open. So that's the whole idea. So basically, we think about it like this. The more people care about animals, the more people will eat vegan. That's probably true, but this is also true. The more people eat vegan, the more they will care about animals. And with this, I mean, for whatever reason, to whatever degree. So in every activist group I speak for, there's always people who started becoming vegan for health reasons, for an allergy, whatever. Yeah, I met a whole family of vegans at a vegan fair, and I asked how did it start, and it started because they wanted to make pancakes, and they didn't have milk. And they looked, the stores were closed, it was a Sunday, and they looked on the internet, pancakes without milk recipe. And that's how it started, you know? So it doesn't have to start, this is the whole point, it doesn't have to start with animals. And sometimes it's even better not to talk about animals. Sometimes you can help them more by not talking about it. It depends on the context. Right? Sometimes if you have like a certain, you talk to an official, like a politician or whatever, and you know they're not interested in animals, but they're interested in health or whatever, you talk about that. You don't come with like meat is murder t-shirt, right? So what we need is not this. So if the alternatives are too pricey, or not available enough and not tasty enough, then the required effort, the required motivation is very high. You are probably all very motivated. I was very motivated. 30 years ago, I already became vegan. So it was quite difficult then. But I was motivated enough to do it, and I didn't care that I had to make all this effort and that the alternatives weren't there because I was so committed to the animals. But most people are not, so we need to create this. We need alternatives everywhere, very good quality, very cheap, etc., so that there's no effort needed anymore to go vegan. And then the awareness can follow, right? So instead of this, we need a food environment, and this is like, because I was talking about the part of the food environment and institutional change, we need something like this, right? Like a completely different environment that is conducive to change, and where the good thing is the easy thing. The right thing to do is the easy thing to do. And so we do that with, and Tom has talked about these things, all kinds of like really good meat substitutes, and also we need to have supermarkets and chains, etc., offering it, and we have to have better prices like IKEA here, etc. And question is, how do we get there? Because 5 years ago it seemed very, very promising. Just before COVID, you had Beyond Meat, you remember that, like when it went to the stock market, went public, it was like the best introduction to the stock market in a long time, and then it just came down and down and down. So we're not so optimistic anymore. How do we create this change? Well, I don't think it's a matter of just saying go vegan to people. We say go vegan in all kinds of ways. Go vegan very nicely, or go vegan, you cow-sucking perverts. All the same messages, basically, in different wrappings. And a big part of our movement is still doing that, because they think that it works, because it's where we want to get people. Why would you ask for anything else? If you want people to go vegan, why would you ask anything else? But also because they think it's immoral to ask for less, right? I talked about that. If I asked you to reduce, people will say like, oh, or like a vegan might say, oh yeah, but we're not asking people to beat up their wife only 5 days a week instead of 7 days a week. Have you heard that argument? Right? I think it's a very bad argument, because meat eating is something that 95% of the population celebrates, and beating children or whatever is illegal. Right? So it's very hard to compare these things where the norms and the social acceptance is so very different. You have to take that into account. Yeah? But, and this is also what I saw with Anonymous, this whole idea of like not seeing gradations, only seeing black and white, and not seeing how some diets are better than others, some raising of animals is better than others. We have to recognize these differences. We cannot be absolutists in terms of black and white, And I think that like this kind of attitude is very, very damaging, The very, very, I'm so vegan that I don't watch Kevin Bacon movies, it says. It's very damaging because it doesn't allow for a bit of nuance. And I also illustrate it like this. So if this is the number of meals you have in a year, like about 1,000 and something, 3 meals a day, and if they're all vegan except for this one, then you are, if this is like a non-vegan meal because you go to your grandmother and your grandmother has made a cake and you don't want to disappoint her because she's going to die any year, and you eat the cake, then you're still vegan for 99.7%, which I call vegan enough. All right? And there's no use. This is when the pig in the crate says like, oh my God, are we really discussing this? Yeah, that's what I think. And I see a sort of like, when we have these discussions, I see a sort of religious attitude. We talked yesterday a bit about some similarities between veganism and religion. One of the religious aspects is that sometimes we go to the source texts. Like when Christians have a discussion, they go back to the Bible and say, what does the Bible say? What is our source text on veganism? Not Peter Singer, but this guy, Donald Watson. In 1944, he defined veganism as whatever. And people say like, yeah, Donald Watson defined it like this, so this is what veganism is. And I think the vegan society back then, when it started, had actually a very interesting definition at some point, or a very interesting rule for who could become a member and who couldn't. And it said an associate, so a member of the vegan society, makes no promise as to behavior, but declares himself in agreement with the object. Do you understand? He doesn't say, I'm vegan or I'm going to go vegan, but I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing that this is the direction we should go in. And there's so many people who agree with us without being vegan yet. And we should allow them to be, I think, part of our team. We should allow them to like care about animals while still eating them. It's strange, it's a paradox that I wouldn't do it, but there's so many people like that, so many more people than vegans. And they're actually afraid of joining us because they think like, okay, if I join them, I have to go vegan, or if I join them, I'm not vegan, they will think I'm a hypocrite, etc. No, I think we should like let that exist. Let it exist next to each other. People who care about animals and who are not vegan. So, reduction is whenever we are not asking people to go fully vegan. And this could be like a Meatless Monday once a week, or it could be Veganuary, like a whole month of vegan, or it could be something like plant-based universities, where we don't ask people to go vegan, but where we ask them to sign that the university cafeterias should go vegan. So these are all incremental and reduction steps. And the reason, very quickly, why this is useful is, first of all, people are more likely to do something when you don't ask for too much, right? The reducers may become vegans, the step by step. The reducers together reduce suffering more because there's many more of them. They have a bigger impact right now than the number of vegans. But most importantly, many reducers may tip the system faster than a few vegans. So I compare it to this, gluten, the new Al-Qaeda. You know, the idea of being gluten-free has gained a lot of traction over the last 2 decades or something. And you know maybe that there's 2 kinds of people who are avoiding gluten. There's the ones who really have to do it or they die or whatever happens to them. And there are the people who like avoid gluten because they think it makes them feel better, etc. But they don't have to. They're not allergic or whatever. And the one group, the ones that is really allergic, is so much smaller than the second one, right? But it's for this one that the industry started to create products. Before there was this group, these people only had very bad products because it was hardly worth it to cater to this group, right? And we have the same thing in the case of vegans and meat reducers. This is a very small group of 1 or 2%, probably 1%. And this is a group of maybe 30%. So this is where it becomes interesting for companies to create products. Also for restaurants. And so I compare it with all these kind of milks that you have. You know, there's, like Tom said, there's quite a significant amount of milk is already plant-based milk, but it's not vegans drinking all that milk. They would have to be drinking milk all the time to be responsible for that demand. It's people who, for some reason, to some degree, reduce their milk consumption and substitute it by plant-based milk. They are responsible for that demand, and it's because of them that you have this big choice. This wouldn't happen if there were only vegans, or at least you couldn't find it in the supermarket, but only in specialty stores, right? So this is the big lesson here. Reducers make it easier for everybody to go vegan. They're very fundamental, strategically important. And I finish with the third part, movement building. So I burned out, this is not me, but it could be me. I burned out in 2014 from leading an organization. I never burned out from caring about animals or doing the animal work, but I didn't want to lead people anymore. I wasn't very good at that. So after my burnout, I was depressed for a while, but then I kind of reinvented myself as somebody who does work on the meta level, who doesn't talk to the meat eaters, but who talks to the people who talk to the meat eaters, right? And who talks about strategy and communication. This is my Substack. I give a lot of talks. And this is also something, so this movement, this move to the meta level is also something that you're seeing very much in the movement right now. So we have we're building an incredible ecosystem of all kinds of things, of conferences, of funding circles, of networks, of incubators and fellowships and et cetera, right? So that is work for the long haul. It doesn't immediately show results, but I can tell you that this thing, like if you're older like me, you have the advantage of being able to look back from a lot longer ago and to zoom out. And then the difference is really huge. You know, like when I started, we were all like, there's nothing wrong with social workers and teachers, but we were all in that field. We were all the soft people, you know, and there was no like professional lawyers or whatever, or entrepreneurs. And we didn't have, back then when I started, I didn't know where to go in order to learn anything. And now we have all this ecosystem. You know, if you have a good idea, you can find funding for it, and you can find mentorship for it, and you can find a fellowship to participate in. Just 2 examples of stuff that we're doing. This is Rachel Atchison, who was responsible, you know about in New York how the hospitals are plant-based to a large extent. So she was responsible for that because she worked with the mayor. And after she left that position, she started an organization called, what is it called again? These 2 are very similar, but this one is in New York and this one is in Europe. This is about trying to get people into politics, basically. People who care about animals into politics. And she does the same thing. Impactful Policy Careers in Brussels is a fellowship where motivated people can participate to try to get a function, an internship to start with in the European circle, right? So this is long haul. This is like a long trajectory. They may not do anything significant until 10 years in the future or something, but this is the kind of strategic thinking that we're doing, and we get funding for this, etc. And I want to end with one other initiative, and I think maybe Simon or you have already spoken about it. Kickstarting for Good is our incubator. The applications for this year are closed, but if you're interested for next year, so it's like an 18-week incubation program with 2 weeks on-site in Berlin. We pay all the costs, and we also give grants to some of the initiatives, and you get mentorship, and these are some organizations like Hack the Fork here, organizations who have graduated or who are alumni of that program. This is like something that something very beautiful also that we didn't have 10 years ago, right? We are trying to stimulate a lot of talent to take action and to do smart things for animals and to build something up. If you're interested, you can take a picture of this QR code here. And just to finish, there's one thing I haven't talked about and that I haven't been involved in, is the welfare improvements. I've never been against them. I've just never been involved in welfare improvements. And I think they're also very important. There's a lot of discussions about these things, but I think they can create a lot of traction. I think this is L214, this commitment from LDC in France about cage-free eggs, or a better chicken commitment. So that's an example of millions of chickens having slightly better lives. I think these things are very important too. It's just never been my field. And maybe one critical comment on that is that quite a lot of money is going to these institutional corporate campaigning. So at some point we may have to ask when is it enough or when is it too much? And then another form of activism that my girlfriend does, actually, just finishing with that, is a sanctuary, which is not the most effective thing. I tell her that, and she agrees with me. Not the most effective thing to do, but in her case, it's something that nobody else would do there. So it is a good way to spend her time. So we have a lot of animals on our property, also these 3 podencos, and we are so fortunate that we have on our property a little building that people can rent, and this pays for this is the income to pay for all the costs of the animals. So we're not taking so much movement money. We are working with the money that people spend on staying with us, which is a good income model. Just to mention that for completeness sake. If you want to read more of my stuff, this is my book. It's also downstairs. And this is my Substack where I share my thoughts, which are sometimes controversial. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish you a good rest of the week.
Thank you, Tobias, for this talk. Thank you. Yes, maybe a first question. What are you doing concretely with ProVeg to change behaviors? And how do you approach prioritization of actions in order to change behaviors effectively?
Yeah, it's a very big question. We have some principles that I mentioned, some of them here. We have also made an evolution like what I sketched here from consumer-oriented towards more institutional. One principle that we have is to change the change makers, or to change the ones that everybody follows. You know, so start with the people that everybody looks at, and it could be companies, could be like, if we want to work with a hospital, let's try to work with the best hospital that everybody else is looking at, so that influence the influencers, we call it, in every sphere. But basically, we have different areas of action. We have innovation. We have policy change. We have some consumer work. We have some movement building. We are a very relatively big organization in terms of the plant-based movement, and we have 17 chapters, so they all do sometimes different things. So it's sometimes hard to sketch out like what the common denominator is, and people very much in different countries experiment with different interventions, and then we try to see which ones are good ones that can be copied or repeated. We're always trying to apply principles of effective altruism, scale, neglect, tractability, trying to see where we can actually make a difference. I think that in general, we have to be, as a movement, we have to be quite modest about our knowledge in terms of what works and what doesn't work, because I don't think we've cracked the code yet. I think that years ago, maybe it was clearer what we have to do. Now, I think that to a large extent, we should be uncertain. I think one thing that we underestimated as a whole movement is cultural resistance, and it's hard to deal with that. Like if a culture suddenly turns to the right and turns more authoritarian and turns more masculine, etc., it's very hard to see like what can we do to change that. And I think it's very determining of the field in which we operate. Yeah.
Are there any questions? And maybe, tell me if I'm wrong, Tobias, but maybe people can also try to ask questions in French slowly.
I can do my best.
If they need to.
Yeah, I can give a totally irrelevant answer if I don't understand it, but yeah.
Ok. Donc vous pouvez aussi poser des questions en français si c'est trop compliqué avec l'anglais. Faut que tu t'approches. Other questions?
Merci pour la présentation. Comment vous travaillez à Proveg à propos du problème des petits animaux, donc cette idée que how do you work with the problem, like the small animal replacement problem?
Yeah.
That is that maybe if people decide to eat less cows, then they will end up eating more chickens, and that would increase the total amount of suffering.
Yeah, I think it's important. When we do outreach or when we work with companies or with, so we don't do like the animal welfare stuff and like better chicken commitment or something. We try to change the kitchen or the offer. We always will, I mean, I think the main arguments for kitchens to do that is sustainability and health. And that could risk like a shift towards chickens, but we always like bring in that argument as well, and we say like, okay, if you do this, if you make this switch, this will be worse for animals. So we have to like also take animal welfare into account. So we will not generally applaud or encourage this substitution towards smaller animals. It's a matter of like bringing, I think, a sort of holistic message where the animals are not left out either. But the main arguments will be environmental and health in those institutional cases. Yeah.
So is it like you don't advocate for reducing beef consumption?
We wouldn't say it like that. No, we wouldn't say like reduce. It's a reduction on the whole level of animal products. And it could be milk, it could be this or that, but definitely not like reduce red meat only by itself. I don't think that's a good message. Yeah.
Nice, thank you.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. So I think I mostly agree with what you said, especially the idea that we have to change people's behaviors in order to change people's belief. It's one of the main reasons I'm working at animal alternative proteins. But one of my concerns with that strategy is that flexitarians do not make activists. If you want people to become activists, they have to be truly engaged and they have to be vegetarian or even vegan, because I think even vegetarians are not so likely to become animal rights activists. So my concern with the reduction strategy is that we may lack activists or people in the movement to do things in the long term. And so how do you try to manage to have both this vegetarian strategy, which I think is a good thing to do to reduce meat consumption on a overall, and to also have people that are very engaged in the movement because they are fully committed, because they are vegetarian or vegan or whatever. So how do you consider that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think we have to look at the movement as a whole, and like I said, like something like Anonymous, who people are talking about completely going vegan and stopping oppression of animals, stopping using animals and using the ethical arguments, they can be good, well placed to create new activists, and that's also their ambition. They say like, we don't want to create vegans, we want to create activists, and not just activists, the best activists, they say. I think maybe if we don't do that, then there's other groups doing that. We also look at where we can put the already vegans to work, like for instance in our incubator, in our K4G incubator or whatever. But I think it's also an interesting question to wonder, does it necessarily have to be like that only a vegan, a committed vegan, can become an animal activist? I mean, surely it's not so that they could still be an activist or an entrepreneur. Maybe they don't do it for animals. Maybe they do it for the environment, but they still have an impact for animals. So I agree that if you want to do something explicitly for animals, you're going to be vegan, right? But there might be many entrepreneurs or other activists who started an environmental organization or whatever who are not entirely vegan, and I think that's perfectly possible, and that's also okay, and sometimes that's maybe even good, because vegans are not necessarily the best activists or the best advocates in every situation. So I think that's Sometimes I think that it might be better if I weren't vegan. I cannot not be vegan, but I wonder sometimes if I could reach more people by not being vegan, because then people would say oh, this is a person like us. And we had this. It was a very successful. It was not our campaign, but we had a very successful sort of Veganuary thing. It was called Days Without Meat, and it was at the height. There were more than 100,000 people participating, signing up in Belgium, and the whole country really literally knew about it. Nobody didn't know what it was, and restaurants and politicians were participating, and this was started by a woman who was not a vegetarian, not even vegetarian. But it was because she seemed the same person as all the other ones, and it was not started by a vegan up there who was telling everybody what to do. It was looked at, they saw her as somebody equal. And I think that's an example of where a non-vegan had more success than a vegan would have.
Yeah, so I think I agree with you. I think it's for some paid position, especially when you can pay people to do some job. Yeah. You don't need them to be vegan. Actually, you might even want them to not be vegan because you think that vegan might nonetheless act for animals, whereas people that are non-vegan. Anyway, but I think for some positions, you need we need someone to do more than just working hours, or to have a very strong commitment, a professional career in some sense, or academic career, or whatever. You need people to be fully committed. So I think both are true, that we can have people that are not truly committed to work for animals, especially if there are other incentives like money, financial incentives or whatever. But in the end, I think we still need very committed people. Even people like you and I who think that we need vegetarian strategies are still vegan in the end. So,
and all else being equal, I would be in favor of high commitment. Just pushing back a little bit and playing devil's advocate. I mean, there are some downsides to high commitment. There's you care too much. Sometimes you burn out, you get angry, you get frustrated. While a person who's not so committed, who's a bit more neutral, might not experience those things or less quickly. So there are, I think, different sides to the story. But in general, I would say the more committed people we have, the better, obviously. Yeah.
Thank you.
Merci. Thank you very much, Tobias, for your presentation. Like, it was super clear and super interesting. I really love the spin, as Tom said, about the idea of we need to change the behavior before changing the belief. I think it's a very simple, clear, but powerful idea. I'm a bit skeptical because reports from Phonalytics in particular have shown that many people quit veganism quite quickly, especially when they don't do it for animals, but that's another subject. I think you touched about it with the idea of, you have Anonymous for the voiceless, they can do something we don't. But I would be curious of what you think of the idea that a successful abolitionist movement, whether it's for slavery or animal exploitation, needs actually both more incremental movement, making realistic improvements, and this more radical abolitionist wave in order to avoid stagnations in the improvements, making the last gap when it's needed, making sure also that the ground that is gained is cemented so that the narrative around this change is said to be done for the good reason. Because, for example, when we try to sponsor the idea of eating less meat because of the environment, if one day the tech bros from the Silicon Valley make something that makes it so that carbon is not an issue anymore, then we're screwed. Mm-hmm. People are going back to meat. But maybe this more abolitionist part of the movement can cement the idea of, no, we also did it for the animals, mm-hmm. and it's something we can all accept. So maybe it's a bit too naive and like everybody should get along. But what do you think of this idea that we actually need these two parts and they need to be able to respect each other, coordinate with each other? Yeah. Like you did with Paul, which was great. I
very much agree with that. There's some things, first of all, you can do abolitionist work in less or more effective ways, so there's still some spectrum there. And in general, I'm very much in favor of if I would know they would work, the very radical abolitionist tactics and direct action, etc., I would join them right away because that's what I would love much more than sitting behind my computer, But what I think, and what I also said to Paul, is that I believe that by creating this society in which we have more options, there will be more room for more not violent, but more direct action, more in your face, more moral action, etc. Just like because what I said about the behavior and the thing, if we live in a society where we know that meat is not so important for us anymore, we will be much more open-minded towards those things. It's just like you can today, if you are very radical, if you do very radical activism to protect cats, everybody will support you, right? But if you do it for cows, they won't. So it's just this not being able to see the problem. It's something that you're using. So in English we say where you stand depends on where you sit. So what you're doing depends on your position on something depends on what you're doing. If you're a farmer and you make your money from killing animals or from raising animals or whatever, you will have an opinion. That's the consequence of that, right? So if we can manage to create these plant-based products everywhere and create different norms, etc., and make it more normal, then my suspicion is that people would be much more supportive of and also open-minded towards more abolitionist messages, even towards direct action, etc. So I think the two very well go together, and I agree with you. Sometimes I feel okay, let's just talk about the animals all the time, and make sure that this message gets through. I think that point will come, but that it's easier and more productive to do that, and we should do it already, but I'm hopeful and expecting that it will become easier and more productive as time goes by, when we have more of a society that's conducive to have those conversations, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe the idea that as society change, we can turn the volume knob, maybe that gives the proportion of let's be abolitionist, let's be incremental, and we can become more and more abolitionist. But
so I am expecting that there will be a day when we don't talk about this stupid moderation and incremental stuff anymore. We could just go all out. But even like something like racism, which is a much more or anti-racism, a much more advanced topic in society, even there we still have to be we're sliding back, and we still have to be careful about these things, or if we want to reach people, etc. So it takes longer than probably we think it will take.
Perfect, thank you. Just wanted to say again, thank you for what you've done with Paul Bashir. I know he's not always an easy person, but I think that you two played the game to be very cordial. It was extremely important for the movement, for this dialogue to go through, so thanks
you. We do a follow-up this month, or next month,
Well, that's the end of the Q&A session. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.